Our first speaker here this morning. So let's give her a big round of applause here again. Patricia is one of the organizers. She's got a deadly, what do you call it, war cry?
A lele.
A lele. Yeah, let's hear it one more time. Here. Right there we go. Aho.
I did a real tiny one. It can be way louder though. You know, I didn't know that we were getting 2-for-1 MCs. I'm so thankful for both Willis and for both Cal. So honestly, thank you. Big round of applause for them. The vibes that you brought yesterday, and like, if you missed the round dance, you missed the whole conference. It was really, really, really good. And just the way that you gentlemen worked the room, it was awesome. So thank you very much. And I danced a tea dance yesterday. So I just watched Lisa do it, and I was just like, hey, that's not that hard. And so yeah, if we ever get a chance to do a tea dance, which I hope we do, because we did talk about it during our fall conference last year when we were linking our ways of knowing, being, and doing. We had said a round dance, and we were talking about, and I'm sorry, it was a little bit in hindsight. And we said, you know, there's dances that Dene people have, and it was the tea dance. And yeah, so to be able to do that for the first time ever, it was wonderful. So let's get to it for today. It is with great honor for me to introduce Celia Deshambeault, because we're from the same hometown. We're from the same river system. We're from the same trees. We're from the same grass. And I love her from the top of my head down to the bottoms of my feet. And when I seen her, so I'd come in and I was just motoring. It's either real slow or full-blown 100 miles per hour for me for walking. And she's like, just blows right by me. So I turned her, I was like, who's saying that to me? Here it's Celia. So I slowed down and gave her a hug. You know what she said to me? And I know what she means about this, because I feel the exact same way. It feels like I'm coming home. So we know that Celia has worked with us. She has planted tons of seeds. And the work that you're going to see in the sessions today, those are the seeds that you planted in every one of us. And you're going to see that work. So I hope that you're going to be able to get around to the sessions. So Celia is Nehiao from Cumberland House. She has dedicated her life to revitalizing and reclaiming her language. A passionate language and culture program advocate, Celia emphasizes their transformative roles in empowering Indigenous students and fostering cultural identity. As a leader and Cree language resource developer, Celia actively creates resources to support her school's foundation in language and culture. In October of 2024, their MEA school board declared Cree an official language, initiating a transformative focus on integrating language and culture throughout the school. In her Western education, Celia holds a Bachelor of Arts, Bachelor of Education, a Master of Education, and she is currently pursuing an Indigenous language certificate at the University of Saskatchewan, alongside with her PhD in Indigenous educational leadership at the University of Regina. Celia's work exemplifies innovative approaches to culturally grounded education, empowering communities, and preserving heritage. Please join me in welcoming my dear Celia.
Tanse, Celia Deshambeault nitsnigason, kaministigo manaigaskak ninaucha, maske genonina, mistaine meneni tenu da bigasqueano mani naugas canamato noche. So my name is Celia Deshambeault. My Cree name is Esugatsit Ninawiske, which means strong Swampy Cree woman. I got that name when I was 15 years old from an elder in Opasquac Cree Nation, which is where my grandmother comes from. During that time, I would never use that name. I didn't feel that I didn't fit that role at that point. And I started using it probably about 2 years ago, explaining that true identity of who I am as a Swampy Cree woman. As Patricia said, it felt like I was home. I've seen so many people that I've worked with in the past, and it's just that sense of home. You always leave a little piece of who you are in places that you go because of the experiences that you take with you. And that happened to me at MLTC because a lot of the things that I've done, a lot of the things that I have worked on started from that foundation that happened there. So it's near and dear to my heart. Like everything that happens that I see, I still have a lot of Facebook friends from the nations that I worked with. And there's a lot of great changes that are happening. Now, I put the wrong date on here. I noticed that right away as soon as it went up there. But I'm an advocate for language and culture. All of you know that. A lot of things that we've done in our nation was implement theory into practice. And we've had such tremendous changes in our own community. A lot of good things happening there. I always start off of situating myself of who I am. And this is who I am. This is it in a nutshell because kinship is extremely important to me. Wagutwin, the relations that we have and the people that have shaped us in the past. So when you look at these pictures, to the right are my grandparents. They were my first teachers of Indigenous knowledge and language. Both of my grandparents were fluent Swampy Cree speakers. My grandmother spoke very little English. She had a hard time actually speaking English. My grandfather was an Anglican priest. We learned a lot of great values from him. He was a fluent language speaker, but they raised me and my sister. I was only 2 months old when they when they took me into their home and raised me. And I think a lot of the foundational pieces that I carry were from them. When my grandmother, the day that she had passed on, we were sitting on her bed. There was 3 of us that she had raised, 3 grandchildren, and she said, Sagituk, Wichituk, Manachituk. Sagituk means love one another. Wichituk to help one another. And Manachituk to respect one another. I always took those as foundational teachings of the laws of our people and the laws of the land. And those kinship laws that guide us to change who we are and to make sure that those foundations are in place. So I keep those with me and practice them as much as possible because she left those teachings with me and with my brother and sister. I'm bad with left and right, obviously, but to the left of the pictures are my late mom and my grandparents, and that was on my grad. My mom passed away shortly after this. She had passed from kidney failure, and it was a really hard time for me because I was already a mother. My son was 2 years old at this time. And I only had her for 2 years at that point because that's when I finally developed a relationship with her. So it was really hard on me when I lost her because I only had 2 good years with her. And then when I was thinking back about her, there's so many things that colonialism did to our people. And my mother was one of the reflection of what had happened. I don't know what the trauma she carried. We didn't have those conversations, but I know they were hard on her because she was an alcoholic. And I know that during that time, all those things that she had carried, she couldn't be a mother to us. And so my grandmother took that role over for her. But those 2 years were the best years of my life because I felt what it was like to have a mother. I always get emotional when I talk about her because it's been a roller coaster of a ride when you don't have a mother to guide you and to teach you all those things that when you become a woman and all the changes. We were just talking about menopause, and I know I'm getting up that age there, and I was like, why aren't people teaching us these things, the changes that we go through as women? And, that part of that, there's always that, that sadness and that, she would have been there to support that, right? And so when I talk about her, I have felt that the peace that I needed in my heart at that time and to grow from that, because during that time before I became a mother, I had so much anger toward her because she had left us. And I know this story transcends in this room because we've gone through a lot of broken homes. So I know firsthand how it feels to come or not to have your parents be there for you. Or I shouldn't say be there for you, but not to raise you. Because as time went on, like I developed a relationship with my father, and it's one of the best relationships that I've ever had. He was not there till I was 12. But all those things, when we look at the roots of what had happened, I could have done a lot of things that, other people are doing. Like I could have, fallen at that time because that identity piece, the strength of family was not there for me at that time. So when you start looking at what these kids are going through, especially in the education system that you're in, and you're looking around and you see where these kids are coming from and the issues that they're facing, it's because of some of those lost kinship ties. Now, the bottom, I'm a mother of 8 children. My oldest is 33. My youngest is turning 15 this year. And I'm raising 4 grandkids right now. So we have a very busy home. My youngest son is here in Saskatoon and university, and we were talking about his experience here. And these are things that even us as leaders have to look at and support these youth that are in the city that leave home, because it's probably the hardest time for these kids. Because what happens, they leave home, there's a loss in that tie again, because now they don't have the same supports that they have at home when they come here. Now, of course, we're supporting him as much as we possibly can. He said, "It's so lonely here, Mom." He said, "I miss the loudness, I miss the craziness of the house. Everything I thought I hated about home is what I miss the most." So we know we've developed a lot of things in our kids, and all the things that we've done, and supporting them with university and things like that. But there needs to be advocates for our First Nations kids in higher education. We're seeing it. We're seeing some of these kids drop out because of the connections that they don't have. Some of our youth that are here from Cumberland, I know some of them haven't been able to make that transition well. And one of the things they said, we need people there that's going to support us, to talk to us through, especially those hard times. A lot of us have been there. I know when my first experience coming to Saskatoon, I told my husband, we're just newly married, we're both 21 coming into the city, and I said, I don't want to go here. It was so alien and foreign to me. And he said, no, we're going. We have no choice. So coming here, it was that first year was tough on me because that isolation piece, and I was expecting my second child. So it was a really crazy time for me, but eventually I got used to it. But that first year was the hardest. We went home almost every weekend because we needed that family connection. And eventually we got used to it. But when we're looking at education and building that foundation in our schools, we need to be able to prepare them for that space and place. To the bottom left is my dad. And my dad has been a rock in everything that we've done. Those are my 2 daughters. They both play football. They're both in sports. They do a lot of things. My daughter Sienna she's 16. Played football in Alberta. Had a major surgery in January. She tore her ACL. We flew her to the States to have surgery. She's recovering. She's back in Alberta, doing really well over there. She's coaching that same team that she played for, and then hoping that she's going to get back into sports. So, there's a lot of things that, I was talking about the kids. I said, our daughter was lucky that she had the support system to be able to support her to do things, but not every youth has that. So we have to look at different ways to support our youth. Be that if they want to play something, we're there front and center for them. Those are those connections we build in our communities and our homes. And we build them, excuse me. I knew I was going to need water. I talk a lot. So when we talk about all those things, we have to be prepared to support these youth that want to do something other than going to university. We talk long and hard in our community. What do we need to do to support our youth? There's a multitude of ways to do it. We're preparing them for higher education, but there's different avenues of higher education and what that looks like. Many times we expect our kids to go to university. We don't really look at the trades. We don't look at arts. We don't look at those other areas. So what we've done in our community was look at all these avenues and try to support them in every context that we possibly can. So we're reclaiming identity, who we are and where we come from. So what we did was, in the past 2 years, we really looked at the foundational changes. Many times, I shouldn't say many times, in the past, what they've done was that they've taken all these programs, the latest, greatest things that you see out there, bring them into the school and think that's going to change. It may change a little bit, but if you look at your grad rates, you look at the data, it's not changing very much. And why do we keep doing the same thing? expecting different results. So what we've done is looked at all these different things. We've surveyed the kids, we surveyed the community, we looked at all these recommendations and started applying those recommendations because change needs to happen at the grassroots level. What your parents are wanting, what your leadership are wanting, those types of things need to be implemented in the school. But it doesn't say that we're putting Western education first and foremost. What it means is that we're building a foundation in language and culture, ensuring that these kids have a strong identity, and then we're implementing Western knowledge, but not as something that's, our First Nations education is higher. The knowledge that our elders, our people carry are a lot higher than Western knowledge, and I know Chris is going to tell you that this afternoon. So when we start looking at a foundation through language and culture, we see change happening. So I'm going to use grad rates. When I first went back to Cumberland, it was just grad time, and we had 5 graduates. The following year, we had 31 graduates. This year, we're expecting about 25. And those are some of the changes that we made. But we looked at the rates of how many students are coming to our school. The first year, I think it was 21, 22, they had 167 kids. Slowly started building. We have 320 kids now. And we're looking at more coming. There's a lot of parents calling and wanting their kids to be part of what we're doing in our community. We've changed a lot of things. We upped everything that these kids were saying they wanted to see in that school. That's what we're doing. There's still a lot of work that needs to be done, especially with language and culture and implementing in what we're doing in the school. And so when we're looking at ancestral knowledge, the foundation in language and ceremony, we know that in the past there was a strong educational system that happened. It was usually storytelling was what passed down that knowledge. We know all of this. So a lot of things that I'm telling you, or I hate to say telling, but a lot of things that I'm talking about here are things that we already know. We've done this so many times. We know the history. But what are we doing to change it? So you have to ask yourself, what are we doing to transform the education that we need? The education that these youth need. The education to allow them to have better services in a sense. So when I'm looking down or looking at, some of the meetings that we've had, we looked at what is currently happening, what is needed. For the first time, we're actually implementing post-secondary into what we're doing, the plans. Because in the past, what they've done is they funded kids. That was basically their job, was to make sure that we're funding education, but they didn't look at lifelong learning and the things that we need. So we're doing that. We were talking with both universities to see who is going to support us in that journey. We looked at the things that we needed, and we're looking at what's coming into our school. We're seeing a trend, and I know this is probably right across all of your schools, is autism. A huge spike. In kindergarten, we have 6 autistic kids. Pre-K, there's 1. But I know with pre-K, I always talk about the pre-K because there's 3 pre-K programs going on. And I know within each of those programs that they have an autistic child in them. So those types of things, we've been looking at that. What we need to do to better support our teachers and to make sure that we have future teachers that can take on that hard load that's coming, because we're seeing such a trend in a lot of these different, I guess we call them gifts, because they are gifts when you look at it. But there's different things that the current education system that we go through does not support that. And I know many of you that have taken education, you see the classes that you've taken. How many of those classes truly supported what you're experiencing right now in your schools? So that's what we're doing, is trying to change that way and trying to make sure that we're ready for all these things that are happening. So I talked about the strength, and we had oral traditions and kinship. We're bringing those back, the oral traditions, the storytelling. We have elders that come into our school. Now, when I first came back to Cumberland, I didn't see elders in the school. There was no language in the school. There was very little programming happening in the school. So there's something happening almost every day, because these kids need an avenue and a space to be able to do other things other than what they're getting into now. So this, the disruption, that's the biggest piece that happened. We know that there was huge impacts on education. If you really look at the schooling that happened, or what had happened when schooling started in Saskatchewan especially, it was based on agriculture. They wanted the people to get used to that agricultural lifestyle. Things changed as time went on, but you got to remember when all education started, or public education started in Saskatchewan, residential schools was a reality in our First Nations communities. We know that. The reality, when you look at it, you understand that there's a lot of impacts that residential schools had on our people and continues to have on our people. The day schools, the Indian agents that were in our communities, we know that. This is a history that's true. This is a history that has happened. And we talk about all these impacts, and the impacts of all of those things that happened were present in probably my mother's lifetime. Now we feel it through loss of family, and it continues on and on. I was just having a conversation as I was driving up here with my son, and we were talking about family, and I explained to him, family always comes first. You need to nurture your children. They are the ones that are being displaced because of breakdowns in marriage and things like that, because I'm raising 2 of his kids right now. And I had said that, those kids need a mother or father to guide them. They need somebody that's going to be there for them 100%. And so we had those conversations, and he's like, I know, I want to move home so my kids can be with me, and things like that. But we know that there's a reality of that disruption of education and what it had done, because it carries on, and it's up to us to stop those, those things that are happening in our communities and in our homes. Trauma. Like I said, my mother experienced a lot of trauma. I've never heard her story, and I wish I could have heard her story to fully understand why she did what she did. But at that point in time, I was grateful for those 2 short years that I had with her as a mother. But it has detrimental impacts on our school. I'm sure a lot of you see it, excuse me, a lot of you see it through parent engagement, and sometimes the lack of parental engagement, because we know that there's that distrust in the system because of what they experienced in their lifetime. So bringing that back and trying to make that, for them to understand the place that our schools, that it is a safe place of learning, and that their experiences that they had are not the experiences that our students are having now. So we look at that, and we look at all these different pieces. One of the issues that I've seen in our First Nation was the lack of history. When I say lack of history, is when you look at the things that they're teaching, and you're like, why aren't you teaching our own history? Well, there's a lack of research. So we're starting to do all of those different things, and so that there's a timeline and an understanding of what happened. Now, I know a lot of you are experiencing the same things that we're experiencing in our communities. We lost, I'd say in the last 2 months, 6 young people to drugs and alcohol. And that's probably one of the hardest things we take. So like, even in the last 2 weeks, finding out that we've lost somebody that was in the streets in Vancouver, and just last night, finding out a cousin had passed in Edmonton who was on the streets due to drugs and alcohol. Our youth are in trouble, we know that, but what are we doing to change that? I know that education is not the only place that needs to make these changes. It needs to be in every avenue, in every department. So those interagency meetings are extremely important, because we see the need, and we're working together in our community to make sure that we're meeting the needs for all our people. So I talked about what happened in Saskatchewan. It was based on an agriculture society. That's why you have your summers off. Now, if you look at the summer months, there's so many land-based activities that can take place during that time, but it's usually the time that we're on a break. So looking at those different things, I know somebody had suggested a seasonal calendar for education, and something we can look at in the future. But those months that we take off, there's a lot of learning that could take place on the land, and it's usually the time we shut down. So when we're looking at agriculture and the education system, the policies and practices that come from that are Western. There's no Indigenous policies that have been implemented at the early time of schooling in Saskatchewan. We know that. All the policies are Western. And yet we take those policies and, put those on our people. Now, I'm not saying our people don't need policies, but we have to look at the policies as a whole. There's disagreements that I have with some of the policies because they're hurtful to our people. And we talked about that, like in particular, some of the evaluations that are done and the way they're done. So my evaluation last year was, it was not a conversation. It was a conversation with me. What happened was they did a survey to all the supports that we had, and then they implemented, I didn't even know what the questions were either. So when you get the results, most of them were positive, but one in particular kind of threw me back was there was a comment that I post too many good things about my kids. And I was like, hey, isn't that supposed to be something good? And it's just, the things that you celebrate in your life, and that was a negative to somebody. And I was really shocked with that. I said, well, maybe they need to have a conversation with me, if we figure out that stuff. But some of those policies that we push on our people are very hurtful. And when I say hurtful, for example, if you had let's just say Patricia really got me mad and I had to do a secret evaluation on her. Do you think I'm going to have a strong evaluation based on what I'm feeling about her at that moment? No, they're hurtful. And so I talked about that, and so now they're doing a different process. I said, I don't agree with that process because I know that for a fact that there was a teacher very angry at our principal. Same thing, they did this survey, this anonymous survey. Didn't know who said it, but she could pinpoint who it was, but even that, it wasn't a good process for us, and I didn't like that. I'd rather sit down and have those conversations that need to happen and quit recreating that colonial mess that has been imposed on us for years and years and years. We need to change the way we're not only delivering education, but it's also delivering the assessment or the performance measurement, I guess you would call it, right now. So the curriculum, I've always had an issue with the curriculum because it was not First Nations. What they did was they met with one tribal council, and it wasn't even your tribal councils. You could look at those curriculums and really see who had the influence on them. And then you look at the practices that are in there. The majority of the practices are Western practices, ideas. There is no celebration of who you are in there, especially in our Dene communities. I don't see Swampy Cree, my identity, represented in that curriculum either. I've had an issue with that for a long, long time. But when you start looking at curriculum as a whole, what are you doing with that curriculum? So what we've done was that we look at the outcome, we take the skill, and we apply it to a First Nations context. If they have to read and write, if they have to do all these different things, we take those pieces that they have to do and ensure that it's implemented in our land-based or in our seasonal practices. And that's changed a lot of that foundation because in the past, with a lot of land-based learning that you're doing and a lot of different practices that you're doing, that now there's a learning and there's an extension of who you are in there. And then there's gaps in the learning that we're doing. We see it in the grad rates that are coming out. There's huge gaps in what's happening in First Nations education. We keep taking on Western practices, thinking they're the latest and greatest things, but really what are we doing? We're further colonizing our students. We're making them think Western and taking away their identity. So when you think about residential schools and the impacts that it was a erasure of identity, language, culture, everything that made our people Indigenous. The goal of residential schools was to take away who they were and to make sure that they were white. The thought, the practice, everything about them was taken away. We got to remember that. And many times when you look at the policies and the practices that we're implementing on our teachers and our students, it's not who they are. Now, there's ways that we can meet. I know Joe Willett in 2017 said, we want our children to know who they are, but we also want them to know the Western world. So there has to be those connections made. We know that in university, they have to know those foundational teachings. They have to know the skills, but we can still reach those skills in a First Nations context. We know that. We've seen some of your schools do that. So when you're looking at connecting skill and practice from your community, keep doing that, because that changes the dynamics of what we're doing in our schools, because these kids can fully understand what it's like to be Dene, what it's like to be Cree, what it's like to be Soda, whatever background that they have, because their practices are front and center, and the foundation is who they are. So the impacts on First Nations people, if you look at the displacement, some of that is still in our schools. If we are not teaching our children to have a strong identity in who they are, it plays out in their later years. Because I'm going to go back to Cumberland. So when I left high school, I could read, I could write, I could do everything that I was supposed to do. I come to Saskatoon the first time I seen a powwow, and I couldn't quite understand the feelings that I had at that time. I know that one of the instructors of the program when they had the NORTEP program in L'Orange had said, Cumberland are the lost people. They don't have a true identity. Now our identity is a trapping, hunting, fishing, gathering, but there was a spiritual component that was missing. And that was that connection that I made. Okay, so what did we do in the past? Talking to a lot of people in our community. Cumberland House, we just celebrated 250 years of colonization. But when I say that is because all these years, we've prioritized Western knowledges, Western practices. And so that time and place was, 250 years of colonization. What did it do to our people? Cumberland House was centered to the fur trade. And so we had a lot of impacts there, and we've seen it. So we talked to a lot of people that were my mother's age, and they said, oh, we didn't do that. We didn't have drums. Sorry. But what we did was we started looking at history. We started looking at the Hudson Bay journals. We started looking at all of the things that were documented through the explorers and the people that had come around. And we found photos of teepees. We found a dance and a song. And, that started that journey into reclaiming who we were. We've seen a description of a ceremony that lasted 6 days, which is around this time when the goose returns, and it was called the goose dance. We've seen a lot of these different things through, the actual history, I shouldn't say the actual, was documented through the explorers, but it was there. Some of the practices that they said they didn't have in Cumberland are actually documented. And so those teepees changed, even just the pictures of them changed, because I don't know what they thought our people lived in before, but actually having some of those pictures that were taken in the early 1900s, there are probably more. We're just uncovering a lot of the history of Cumberland House and the things that had happened there and reclaiming some of those pieces. So we know that there was a lot of things that happened there, and there's a lot of those barriers that continue to play. When we're talking about systemic barriers, those are the policies and practices that we take that are hurtful and harmful to our people. And we continue to use those to get rid of people. And so there's no real connection to some of the things that are happening in our communities. We have to have that kinship-based model, especially when we're looking at leadership. So all of this stuff, I know we talked about language, culture, we know that's that foundation, we're getting there. I'm just giving you the background things. But it's looking at all of these impacts and all these things and making sure these kids know their true history. I know some of the communities have done that. There's some of your history that's documented, and then you're using that in your Indigenous studies classes or any class that you can. You're using them as a foundation so they fully understand what colonization did to the people and the things that we're going to do to change it. And then we look at the resilience of our people despite everything that our people have gone through. Look at all of you today. You have made that choice and that effort to come to spaces and places to learn. That lifelong learning is evident today. Look at all the people that are here. You want to look at change, we have to do this together. And we have to make those necessary changes to ensure that our people are first and foremost, especially those children that you teach in your communities. Oops. So reclaiming identity through language and culture. So when you look at all of these things, it wasn't that, like I said, when I first came back to education in Cumberland, there wasn't much going on with language and culture. They had a Cree teacher that taught pre-K to 12. How many times do you think that teacher was in the classrooms? Not too many. No fault of their own, because there was no priority in language at that time. We have 3 staff that do language now. One that looks at pre-K to 6, one 7 to 12, and a fluent language speaker that supports. But also what we did differently was that every teacher is required to teach language in their classroom. Every single teacher. It's part of the practice. Now, one of the things that I liked, talking to Patricia, is just that relational piece of evaluation. That's what we do. There's conversations with our teachers that happen. There's true evaluations that take place, because sometimes we bring outside people to come in and do an evaluation. You get a snapshot of that day. If I had a really rough day, no sleep, some of our teachers are young parents. Some of their evaluations weren't the greatest because their child was up all night. They didn't do their best performance for that 1 hour block that we get a teacher or an evaluator to come in. But it just provides a snapshot. I think one of the things that we talked about, the real pieces that we want to see, is the practices that they're doing in the classroom, as well as the foundational planning that happens in their classrooms. So although that evaluation it's valuable to provide us with some information, we look at those conversations with our admin team as the biggest pieces of the evaluation. How many times that administrators walked in that classroom and just observed for a few minutes. And we're seeing some of the changes that are happening because of that relational way of doing an evaluation and supporting our teachers through that. So when we're looking at these pictures, so this is an elder that had come into the grade 3 classroom on top here. This is a classroom where my grandson is in. And he said, I have hope. I have hope for our youth. Because these kids in this classroom in particular, the teacher is actively teaching them the language, of course, English too, but finding every single way that she can incorporate language into her classroom. These kids are starting to speak the language. And we know that pre-K, kindergarten, grade 1, that's probably the best place to start, but it's coming, it's slowly coming. So this classroom, when he was talking to these kids, even the awareness and understanding of what's happening in their community. Right now, we are experiencing low waters in Cumberland. And these kids are understanding that. And this one little boy said, Mushroom, how are we going to help the Delta? So they're talking about all these different things. And then they're not fluent or they're not full sentences, but it's getting there, because these kids were asking questions like, he's a trapper. His life was on the land. He talked to these kids, he was speaking to them in English. And then they said, Mushroom, speak Cree. We understand a lot of the animals. So they would ask him questions like, did you trap a minachisak? Did you trap a miskak? Like things like that. So he was taken back by that, because these kids were wanting to ask these questions or as much of the questions as possible in the language. And he said, I have hope for these kids. I have hope for what's happening, because I come here a couple years ago and I didn't hear any language at all in these kids. I always bring up our grade 2 teacher. She's a second-year teacher, actively incorporating language into everything that she does. And I went in there just to talk to her for a couple minutes, and this little girl, this is grade 2, she said, he's achumoing again. So we were laughing at those types of things, but it was so refreshing to actually hear the language start being spoken. Now I know they're going back to English and Cree at the same time. So I'm going to bring up a story. This is one of the things that I make those connections to what these kids are going through. So I was about 12 years old. My grandmother had a stroke. I was the only one at home with her. And we were talking about all these different things and trying to talk to her, and she couldn't talk. So I phoned my uncle's place, and he come pick us up, and we took her to the clinic in Cumberland. And they were asking me questions. I understood Cree really well. I didn't speak it well. And then the doctor said, ask her if she feels any feeling on her toes. And so I knew some of the words. I was able to connect those words, but I never heard the word toes. So I said to her, trying my best, I said, Nugom, kemusita na ketosimak. So, but that reminded me of that time, because using English words with Cree endings, so that type of stuff that's happening. We're not going to say, okay, you're saying it wrong. We're going to learn with those kids. And so we're always reinforcing those things. But it reminded me of that moment and time and that space and place, because when you're not a fluent language speaker, it's hard to, put those words together. And we tend to do that a lot, where it's kind of like a different type of language in a sense. But it was those types of experiences that we have shape what we're doing in the schools. But it also gives us that understanding that change is happening, and not to be hard on the people that are speaking, because they're trying, they're learning. And so I always bring that up with them. I say things wrong. Now, during that cold spell, I was saying to my husband, I wanted him, I was talking in Cree, he's a fluent Cree speaker, and I was trying to ask him to feel sorry for me, to get me command start. And so I said to him, I was trying to say, get the magenain, like feel sorry for me. I said, get the mine, which I meant like treat me real bad. So we were laughing about that, but he said, he said, I could see a lot of language coming, but he was making jokes about that. He's like, you want to be treated bad? Stuff like that. So, but it's okay to make those mistakes, right? Because that's how we learn. And when we make those mistakes, we end up knowing how to say it next time. So it was like, all those different experiences that I've had, it's like things that we're actively telling these kids, it's okay to make a mistake. We're always going to say things wrong as long as we're doing it. So when we're looking at this picture, we had another trapper on the bottom, a younger man that had come in and showed these kids all these furs that he had caught, and these kids were able to name. This was, what grade is this one? That is grade 5, a grade 5 class. So these kids were able to name all of these animals in the language, and he even said that. He said, I haven't heard that in a long time. Usually they won't make those connections with language. It is because of the active learning that's happening in their land-based. So our land-based program, our land-based teacher is not fluent. He understands the language, but the support there is, he's fluent. So he's always telling these kids in the language what these things are. And the land-based teacher is learning alongside with him. So he's able to say a lot of things now and supporting the language in the land-based program. One of the other things that is the community involvement and the leadership in the community. So when we look at leadership as a whole, I know that I think probably half of our leaders there are fluent language speakers, the other ones are not. And so when we look at the ones that are not, they're actively supporting what we're doing in the school because they see a value to what's happening, and those are things that they want to learn as well. So there's a lot of change, a lot of support. And when we look at empowering our communities, it's through the language and culture of where you come from. Now, this probably was the biggest change that had happened. So we were sitting it was a Christmas supper, and I was sitting with the chief. And he said, there's a lot of good things happening in our community. I could see it. I could feel it. Going into the school, you could feel that family connection that's happening, a wagutuin happening there. And he said, we're missing something, though, the spiritual component of who we are. He said, I love seeing the square dancing. It's a very Métis culture that we're implementing as part of culture here. He said, I want to see drumming in the school. So I spoke to Chris Scribe. I asked him, can you connect me with somebody that does drumming, that would be willing to teach our kids drumming? That's never happened in our community. That was the first time it happened. So we have Donnie Spidell coming in, and he's going to be with us till June. They're actively making drums right now. He's been teaching them the stories, the protocols around the drum. He's been teaching a lot of different things. And these kids, I observed this time, I took some pictures, and I sat down and really watched these kids. And we had the 7 to 12 in the gym at that time, grade 7 to 12. The kids were quiet. They were engaged. They were listening. So we had some of the boys there, and I think, the bottom picture, some of our high school boys. And we're talking to them later on. I said, how did you feel? He's like, I felt connection. I want to do this. So the end goal of our elder coming into our community and teaching the drum and the teachings behind it is that on grad, those singers from that program will be the ones leading. And so the chief wants these youth leading those things alongside with, of course, we have some adults that are willing to learn now, but it's any ceremony, any time they need, the honor song, that's what they're learning first, that they'll be the ones singing it. So it's changed a lot of the dynamics of what we're doing. Of course, not everybody's going to be on board, right? But when you start looking at the history and bringing back the history to say, yes, it did happen in our area. Yes, these practices happened. How did it look? We don't know. But relying on the people that have done it for a long, long time and bringing them into our community to teach us, then we're reclaiming some of those things that were lost. We know that drum was a big symbol, and we're seeing these youth starting to change. They want to change. They understand that, this is the first step in reclaiming who we are and reclaiming the practices that have been lost for a while. So we got to remember what we're actually doing. We got to look at the reverence, that strong sense of identity, and taking those things in and ensuring that it's happening in your communities. See how much time I still have. I like talking. I could probably be here all day if I could be. But it's that strong respect for the land. Our youth have kind of strayed with that and reteaching some of those things. We're seeing some of the effects of, what had happened, the waterways. About a year ago, maybe a year and a half ago, we lost an older man because there was garbage on our waterways and hit one of those pieces, and he got cut from the motor and he died. And so when we start looking at those things and all the stuff, the practices that the youth have lost, and making sure that those practices are brought back, and so people understand what the impacts of what they're doing. And so when we looked at that, there's people that are taking care of that delta and making sure that it's clean and that there's free of debris and things like that, for things like that not to happen again. So we're looking at those practices, reclaiming a lot of pieces, making sure that we're doing that. So the bottom picture, that's the delta. And it says Cumberland House Nation. I can't even read here. Anyway, they declared the delta as a sovereign space. What does that look like? They're doing a treaty infringement piece on that right now. They're looking at ways to protect what's left of that delta. Like I said, it's drying up. It's changed so much from when I was young to how it looks now. And it's changed dramatically. I have the same picture there because we're honoring our elders. So not too long ago, we bought in a land-based building. And then we really looked at that building because we're going to put different things in there, but we decided, okay, no, this building is strictly language and culture, where our elders will be honored in that space, where they can go there and actively be part of the learning that happens in that space. Cree zone, making sure that the language is spoken as much as possible. Of course, the school is designated a Cree space as well, but really pushing the language so that's all you hear in that building. It's a beautiful building. And then it's looking at doing those teachings daily. A lot of your schools do that already. I've seen so many great things happening in your communities, and making sure that you're pushing those in there. Now, one of the things that we did, and I know you do this in your schools as well, was that making sure that before any land-based experience that happens, that the teachers are teaching why we do it. They're teaching what's happening. They're doing the pre-teaching in the language. And when those kids go out on that experience and when they're hearing the language, there's connections made. And then in the end, they talk about it. What did they learn when they went out there? How did it apply to what they're doing in their classroom? So they're making those connections. And we're seeing it more and more. Some of our teachers were a little, took a little while to get there, but we're seeing more and more of them doing that active learning in their classrooms. So doing this daily, ensuring that you're looking at to live what we're doing. So this resurgent for Indigenous knowledge, making sure it's a foundation in your schools. Your schools are First Nations. Your people need to be celebrated in that educational system. That's one of the things that I learned rather quickly was we don't do enough of that. Our leadership Your people need to start leading. Your people have the lived experiences of your community and the changes that need to happen and the things that need to be in place. It is you that holds those connections from the past to the present. It is you that fully understand what it's like to be First Nations and the experiences that you've had that these kids are having. I know that many times we look to other people to support, and that's that allyship piece. There's always a place for allies. There's a place for those allies to be there for you. But there's also a space and place where you need to start leading your schools and your communities. You're the one that holds those pieces. Many times we do this. We prioritize Western knowledge over the knowledge your own people carry. We see it all the time. And yet we continue to do it. There are many educated First Nations people that could do those same jobs. As an ally, there needs to be a time and space for that recognition that you have to let these people take over. You have to let the First Nations that are from that community take over. They carry the same knowledge. They carry more than that knowledge because they carry the lived experiences of your people. Many times we push over those people to say, nope, you're not good enough to be in these spaces. Lateral violence is rampant in our communities. We don't look at the privileged knowledge that our people have. We don't look at those life experiences that our people have. We push them aside and say, okay, nope, somebody else can come do it from outside our community because they know more. That's not true. I've had the privilege to work with a lot of great allies, and I know that there's that time and place where we take a step back. So I'm going to even use my experience with MLTC. Swampy Cree woman coming in there and leading some of the programs when it should have been your own leading your own language and culture. And I remember my first experience at MLTC going into a Dene community, being a Swampy Cree woman. Distrust, right? What is a Swampy Cree woman doing in a Dene community? We have to understand our spaces and places. So when I look at that experience as a whole, my best experiences was in MLTC because I learned so much from the communities and I learned the value of what our Indigenous knowledge was and is. So when I look at those places and I look at the teachings and the learnings, and it wasn't just, it was a combination of both because I learned a lot of great things for what Western education looked like. I learned the greatest things, or the latest and greatest things that we're implementing in our schools. But one of the things that I made sure is that I learned all these things and I offered advice. Okay, do this. You need to start implementing the Indigenous knowledge in there. But you got to remember too, as an ally, you have to look at those people and help them, support them, and mentor them so that eventually, later on, that they could take over those spaces that they're destined to be part of. It is their nations. It is their spaces and places. Let them lead those places. And so those were the biggest things that we learned in Cumberland, was that we had people that were able to do that. And so we're trying to build capacity within our own nation and making sure that our people have a chance to be able to lead, that they have a chance to be able to take over those spaces that other people have occupied for a long time. A lot of your communities have people that are in higher education pieces like masters, PhDs. Let them lead. I don't understand where this comes from, where our people are not allowed to lead. It floors me from time to time because I have colleagues that talk about these things, But there's, like I said, good allyship, support, be a mentor in that Western space that we might not have the expertise in. And we have those great people that come into our schools and still support because we see that they're a good ally. And we look at those places that they're in. The land-based learning that you're doing in your communities, some of you do phenomenal pieces because you're connecting those things that need to be connected. You're putting those spaces and places and prioritizing your knowledge and making sure that they're the foundation in your communities. So remember that. You're doing a lot of these pieces already. I've seen so many great things coming, and I follow some of the programming that you're doing, and it just solidifies some of those things that we do in research. Now, a lot of these things that I'm pointing out are actually research-based. They're proven that these are things that need to be happening in your communities. I don't, before I do anything, so this is actually part of my PhD stuff. It's things that other places I've been saying for a long time. That the disconnect that happens is theory into practice. How does that look? Some of you are doing it already, but it starts off with leadership. So one of the things that I looked at was, what is leadership? What is indigenous leadership? How does that look like? Well, it starts from your home communities. It starts from the experiences that you have and the foundational teachings that you carry. It starts from the laws of your land and the laws of the people. All of those are the foundational pieces. What you carry is what you're going to put out there. If you carry Western knowledge, you're going to prioritize Western knowledge. If you carry a foundation in who you are and where you come from, you're going to use those and bring that into the teachings in your community because that's what you carry. If you carry the foundations of your, we call them which are our laws. And those laws are evident in a lot of things that we do. So when you look at these pictures, the land-based, that's our land-based building. Beautiful building. We're just finally going to start using it. We had issues with SAS Power taking forever to come, but we're going to start using it now. And that space and place is a Swampy Cree zone. It's where we're going to learn, fully delve into what it looks like for immersion. We're going to look at elders' teachings. There's going to be a space for them to come and sit there and watch the learning or engage in the learning that's happening in that building. The Cree space is in there, the Cree classrooms are in there. So we're gonna do a lot of those types of teachings in that space and really prioritize who we are as Nano people. And then that Indigenous research, when we're talking about that, is the people that have gone to that higher education to learn the ways of that Western knowledge and bring it back into our communities so that we can push who we are in those spaces as well. Sovereignty in education. I know a lot of you are going through the REA process. So in about 6 weeks ago, our Cree Nation signed our delegation, which will transfer education to our Michigachigasik education system. It took a while. There was a lot of meetings that happened. It took a lot of them to put trust in what we're doing in the school. And so when that agreement was signed, April 1st of next year is when that education's transferred over. But not only did they transfer over pre-K to 12, they transferred post-secondary because they see the value in what we're doing and the leadership that's taking place in that school and the changes that are happening, things that they wanted to see for a long time. The foundation in language and culture, the strong connections to Western knowledge, making sure those are going hand in hand, but first and foremost, making sure our children have a strong identity. We haven't seen that in a long time. What they were doing there for years and years was following these programs that didn't do anything for them. Their data was really low. We're seeing an increase. We're seeing an increase in kids coming to the school, and we're finally starting to see parents coming into the school. So there's a lot of changes happening there. There's a lot of things that we've done. So it starts off with that First Nations control. What are we doing in our schools? What programs are we using? Why are we using these programs? What are they meant to do? When I first went to Cumberland, we did an audit, I guess you would say, of all the programs. And I was just floored by some of the things that they were doing because, like literacy, they were using 11 programs. I said, how can you know 11 programs inside and out? What are these programs doing? So we started looking at what each of these programs and narrowed it down. We still do 3. That's still a lot. But it covers different spaces and places to ensure that, they're getting their ELA in there. But we looked at all of these different areas and what we were doing and why we were doing them. Some of them I didn't understand why we're doing them. So we scrapped a lot of things. And then the language and culture, what are you doing here? Well, we have somebody that comes in half an hour, sometimes twice a week if they're lucky. Okay, we're changing that. So the biggest change that happened was implementing that holistic framework. And it was hard. We had teachers upset because that program they come out of university, it's a very Western type of planning. It's a very prioritizing of Western knowledge. So we flipped that. And when they seen that, there was some of them were just so upset. But what we did was day after day as director, even though I had this heavy load that we carry, whenever every director knows that there's so many things you have to do, day after day, sitting in the staff room, working with teachers so that to ensure that they fully understood what they were doing. The other part of it was in their evaluation, but it was, like I said, a relational type of evaluation, talking to them. What are you doing in language? What are you doing with land-based? What are you doing with the seasonal practices? So ensuring that we're doing all of those things. But like I said, it was hard for them to flip that around because the priority in Western knowledge was evident. And so doing that work, it's still hard because there's a lot of things that need to be done. But it's a good hard because it's like looking at all the good things about it and talking through the hard times and talking through those expectations. Like any teacher, a new teacher, it was almost like they were experiencing their first year of teaching because they said they weren't used to this. They were used to pulling ready-made units from teachers, paid teachers. I know a lot do that, but one of the things I said to them was really look at what you're pulling and how it fits into what you're actually teaching, because many of those units don't apply to a lot of things that you're actually doing. So like those types of changes. Language immersion, we're looking at that for our pre-KK. We're really trying to start that process now. And then the curriculum. Like I said, we're MLTC, our leaders in some of those areas. You need to start pulling those things back in and really prioritizing some of the changes that had happened there. So looking at the curriculum as a whole, what is it saying? Breaking it down and making sure that we're doing the skill, like I talked about earlier, the skill. Take the skill, apply it to your land-based learning, apply it to any aspect that you possibly can. You're going to see changes. When you looked at this first thing of Indian control of Indian education in 1972, that's over 50 years ago. They're saying those things that they wanted to see now. What have we done in 50 years? Not a heck of a lot. The time is now. We see our people hurting. We see the things that are happening with drugs and alcohol. We need to change what we're doing in our schools to further support these kids that are coming out of school. Now, although we graduated a lot of kids, how many of those kids went to post-sec or did something else? So we recognize those pieces, so we're bringing a lot of skills type of things in the school where they're doing hairstyling, where they're doing, we did a program with some of our people that have the trades and bringing them in so that there's short-term skills development. We're doing an eyelash tech course, like all these different things that kids can make money off of for now, before they make that dive into that post-secondary world. But we have to build those skills in those kids, and we have to change what we're doing in the schools and make sure that these kids that are suffering, that we're doing something for them, and we see a lot of them. I know we see them in every school. So when we look at transformation of education, all of us know what that means. It means that we're not even at this, we always say on par. We're still not on par. Many of the province have the tools to teach. They have they have set, resources that are bought for their schools. They have everything they need to teach. Our schools don't. We're still not on par, but we get the same money now. Well, I should say the same. We get nearly the same. But that changed a lot too, because I remember when I left Cumberland in 2010, our budget was just a little over $2 million to run that school in a year. Now it's over $7 million, plus enhancements that we get. That's changed a lot dramatically from what we used to get to what we have now. So that's what transformation did. But we still have to look at transformation in a different way. What are we doing to transform the schools that we're currently in? I know a lot of you are doing so many great things. I see a lot of stuff. I watch, the science fairs that are happening. I watch all these different skills. All these things, you're doing a lot of really great things. But you have to look at the foundational pieces. I'm going to keep coming back to that foundation in language and culture. The lived experience of your people, those need to be prioritized, and the leadership that takes place in those communities. So I mentioned that our chief and council signed the delegation. That was a big step for them because that means they don't control the education system in a year. And that puts a lot of, pressure on all of us to make sure that we're making sure those changes in the foundations are what they want to see. And then we're talking about the REA, the Regional Education Agreement. I know that MLTC is going through that. I believe it's still happening. So we just started that process in 2021, and it's been a long process. You've seen this. A lot of you have seen this model. I've changed it just a little. What I've also done is there's a guide that's attached to it now. It's explaining all of the pieces and why they're there. But what I added to the bottom was that kinship. It's the green vine that holds everything together. The laws of our people. They are the ones that pull us together. So this is a model that you've used. And if you see that outer circle, that's your First Nations laws and your values. That is what carries and holds your education system together. That is what ties everything together. Every law that governs your people are the laws that should be applied to your education system as well. If you believe in something, it needs to be somewhere in there, in that system, and recognized. And that's what we did with our chief and council, was made them see that there's another way, a better way of education. When I say better, not saying this model, there's other models that are similar to this. It's whatever model that you're using, that there's ways to make sure that the values, the laws of your people are represented in the education system. It even applies to leadership. We were talking a little bit about this with the chief. Then you look at the black piece there, the black circle, and you look at all these other pieces that I'm going to go over here for a second. I forgot I'm not working. So that black is your leadership. It's that allyship. It's all of those pieces that, again, all the laws and values you carry transcends into that leadership that you play. Everything you carry, the things that you value the most, you're going to use that and spread it out to whoever it is that you lead. It just happens that way. Everything you carry inside is what you're going to show. And then the blue is the collaboration, working together, that we cheat to win, that we always talk about, supporting one another. All of that comes into play of interagencies, or it could be within your teaching staff. You look at many of our classes and they work, most of them would work alone, but it's making them understand that talking to other staff, planning with other staff, you get a lot of things done quicker and faster, and then more ideas come into play, and making sure those ideas are valuable, right? Anytime you have an idea or things that you say, when you talk about in that, when you're collaborating, it gets bigger and it gets better. I've seen it, and I've seen it within the planning that you've done at MLTC and the PDs that you've had, especially when there's a time to tell your story in connection to what you've learned. And then you look at that green part, that's that kinship, the family. And it's not just the families that you come from, but it's the family that you make in that school. And then it ties together your nurturing your heart, mind, body, and spirit, and each of those have a place and space, because we're making sure these kids are not just learning the knowledge pieces. And I recently got to work with a really phenomenal Indigenous leader, and he had passed away. I didn't even know he had passed on. I was just taken back because I had just spoken to him and then found out he had passed on probably about a week after our conversation. He said, I can't wait to go visit, because we talked about this system. We talked about how that looked, and we talked about the pieces that need to be in there. Because he said you need to build them with the knowledge, and the knowledge comes from both Western and First Nations knowledge. Prioritize your First Nations knowledge, he said. And then looks at the relationships that you're building in your communities. What are you doing? What relationships are you creating? Are you building a school that parents can come in and be okay with, to be happy with what's happening? Are you building a space where all of your First Nations people in your school are welcome in there to help teach, to help support, to help do all those things? And then he talked about autonomy, because we have to create kids that are able to do these things when they leave. What are you doing to develop that? That's nurturing the body. What type of things are you doing? And you have to nurture the spirit by giving purpose for these kids. And so when you start looking at it in that sense, there's a big job that we all have to do, especially the purpose. Why do we do the things that we do in the classroom? What is the reasoning why we're doing it? And why are we pushing these things? Sometimes we're pushing the wrong things. We have to listen to the youth and ask them what do they want to see in that education system, and really trying to do that theory into practice and really pushing all of those pieces that need to be there. So throughout this whole journey, the elders guided this. I've learned alongside with many great elders from MLTC. I remember this one point where counting how many elders were involved in some of the things that we did, it was over 100. And that was the best space and place that I've ever had an educational experience, because I got to work with your people and to listen to the elders and the stories that they told. I remember one story in particular, going into Clearwater, and we're sitting with the elders, and they said, we don't have any stories. And then we started telling a story. It was a story that was given to me, and I shared that story. And they're like, wait, we have a story? And then they told a story. All of a sudden, another story was being told, and then another story. It was like, that's the power of storytelling. You know, it invokes some memories, and it brings back some of those things that need to be taught. And so those stories are foundational because they bring back the laws of the people. Keep telling those stories. Those stories are extremely valuable in what you're doing in your communities, because those stories carry pieces of the history that was passed on from their parents and grandparents. So when I think back to the lifelong learning or the journey that we all go through learning, my best space and place was at MLTC, because there I learned how it felt like to be Indigenous. I started building my identity from spaces and places that were not part of where I was, but places and spaces where I was invited into. And so learning from those elders, that connection that I felt, even that trust that came with it, because I had a conversation and with one of the elders, and he says, well, people come here and they go. Nobody stays here very long. And so I was with MLTC for 6 years, and I've built so many great things over there that was made possible from the support from the elders that you have in your communities. I know we've had a lot that have passed on, but their stories are still being told. So tell those stories. Use those stories as foundational teachings. So then you look at the model itself. In the center is the student. And they learned through the language and culture. They learned through being guided by the laws and the values. So that's the fast version of this. It usually takes a while to, talk through it and to really build that understanding of what it is. So when you start looking at those pieces, that allyship is important here, because we gain those understandings of what the skills that need to be, taught to our kids, and then we apply that. I remember my first year coming to MLTC, so I got put in this office with a older white man. Where's Jan? And I couldn't figure out why they placed me with him. So we had these conversations, and it was evident, because he has a strong science background. And I had that First Nations piece, and we started looking at, okay, how could these two walk hand in hand? So we started building in that sense and fully understanding. And those long trips, like I would drive from Cumberland, the first, I think, year and a half, I was going home every weekend. But I would come in on a Sunday, Jan would be waiting for me, then we'd go up north, and lots of conversations. And I think that's where, those, the stories that we told each other actually connected in some crazy way, because who would have thought we would have connected, right? But I was built that respect for what he taught me in Western education, and I used those skills that he had taught me through a First Nations perspective. And I think that was probably that the dynamic piece of what allyship could look like. And so I'm grateful for those teachings and those learnings, Jan. And then also I think, when the conversations that we've had, that there's an understanding, more of understanding of what it's like to be First Nations and the experiences that I had. So when we start looking at those things, it's the priority that we're doing and making sure that we're making those connections that need to be made. I'm not going to go into detail. I don't have time to do that, but it's more of looking at those things and how that could look. Now, when you do the planning, this is just a model. This is just a guide. What you could do is look at that and how it applies to your own First Nation. Take it, make it your own. These things are not set in stone. I also talked to the teacher that said something that I feel might have been nurturing the heart. You may say it's in a different space. Use those, how you feel and how you connect to it, because it's just a guide there for you. It's a space and place where you could look at something and say, okay, I could use this. This part applies, this part might. I want to move this over here because it makes more sense for what our space and place is going through, the things that are happening in your communities. So take it, make it your own, change it. It's there just as a guide. Now, I think the biggest change that happened for us was the holistic assessment piece. Because now we were prioritizing Indigenous knowledges, following, of course, the Western practices that need to happen, but giving kids choice in how they wanted to be evaluated. That's a work in progress, but some of the teachers that use it are experiencing kids that are wanting to be there and doing more. So really fast example of how that holistic assessment practice might work out was, we were just actually talking about this a couple days ago. We have an adult ed teacher that's coming in, and we have our last block coming, and she said, okay, well, I have to teach ELA. So we're looking at the curriculum. Then we're using, of course, we use technology to figure out some things. And I said, okay, these are the units you need to teach. Okay, let's figure how this looks. So we looked at the outcomes, and then we made a big question for that outcome for that unit. Then she developed 4 different assessment items. I shouldn't say child, these are adults, but they're gonna choose how they wanna be assessed for that 30, 40%, however you weight that mark. They get choice. And out of all of those pieces, they're connected to ELA. Everything's connected. But in the end, we talked about, okay, how is this gonna look? Okay, so there's even a poster piece because some of these people are artists, right? So we talked about doing this, and if kids choose that art piece, then you have a gallery of artwork that represents their learning. If it's through a presentation such as this, then they show their learning. If it's through an essay, then they show their learning. So there's different ways that they could show what they've learned in the classroom. And so when we're starting to change that space and place, then it's like you see all of that happening, and it all transcends and everything starts coming together. And so that was the biggest piece that we've seen. And that strength into action. So on October 11th, our MEA board declared Swampy Cree as an official language in our school. That was a big step for them. But what happens from there is that we have a big job and duty to do. We have to create the resources to fit. We have lots of those things, but not necessarily things that apply in the classroom. So we're working on all those pieces, the literature that goes with that, and supporting the teachers in that space and place. So we look at all of these different things, and the community-led, there's a picture on the far right, and that's some of the community members coming in to support the language programming that's happening in the school, as well as the technology-based type of programming that we're doing in the school. We have a parent advisory committee that is supporting and bringing parents into the school now. So what we recognize is that sometimes the hardest part is bringing parents into the school. So teachers are not allowed on that committee. It's strictly parents. I lead it, then I leave. I let them talk about it so they don't, I don't hear a thing or influence anything. I come back when they're ready for me to come back, and then they give us recommendations of what we should be doing in the school. And the role of educators and allies, decolonizing classrooms, being that support of that Western practices that are happening, that need to happen, and being there as that support and mentor for those programs, so eventually they take over. We look at honoring Indigenous perspectives, making them a priority in your schools, understanding that that's that space and place we need to be in, and then amplifying those Indigenous voices, not silencing anybody, to making sure that everybody has a say in the education system that's happening. There's pieces on this model, we've done it with MLTC before, where everybody has a voice in the system, from the janitors all the way up to your leadership. So, and then walking forward together. So bridging those knowledge systems that I talked about, it's about commitment to systemic change, looking at those different ways of how we're gonna govern our schools and the practices that come with it. And the future of Indigenous education, what does that look like in your schools? Prioritizing your language, declaring it as a space and place in your schools, and following and really pushing that language and culture into the setting, because it would become a really dynamic place. We're seeing it unfold in our own space. And then call to action. So strengthen your language and culture programs. You guys, a lot of you have a lot of people in your communities that are still fluent in the language. Bring those people in, get them to help you support the program. There's the policy change that I just talked about. We need to change some of the ways that we're governing in our communities and making sure that a lot of the policies and procedures that are doing are culturally safe for our people. And then support Indigenous educators and leadership, and making sure that whatever the people in your communities want are what's happening in your school. As the late Justice Murray Sinclair said, education is what got us here, and education is what will get us out. Thank you.
Thank you, Celia. We're going to keep you up there, actually, Celia. We're going to do a Q&A here for the next 10 minutes, if you don't mind. Thank you very much for that wonderful presentation. For those of you that want to ask a question, we've got John and Jan with mics. Oh, another lady here too. So we've got mics here. We're going to go around. If you got a question, raise your hand in the back, anywhere around, near and far, and we'll make sure that Celia will be able to help you today. So don't be shy as well. Also, a quick reminder that after this presentation, go into the QR code and fill out your information again. You'll be entered in the draw again as well. So, any questions? Don't be shy. We will have a break after this. Excuse me. We will have a break after this. If we get 5 questions, we'll have a break sooner. That is the deal. Hey? In the back, anybody? I think I saw a hand up there, John. Questions over here in the back corner, Sydney? Anything about language and culture, how you can bring it into your schools? Right up here. One question, so that means they're going to keep you a little longer.
How did you handle pushback from the community and like the local chief and council? Did you receive a lot of pushback when you were trying to overhaul the system?
Yes, we did. And like with any change that happens, what we did was a constant communication with chief and council. Why were we doing what we're doing? We used data, and we used all those things that, we're collecting data, we used it against what was happening. So explaining, some of the things that we're doing, I said, why do we keep doing the same thing we're doing all the time and we're not getting anywhere? We need to overhaul the system. So we walked through the program that we were using and why we were doing it. And so when we started implementing it, we were constant communication. How is it working? What are we doing? So one of the biggest indicators for them was how many kids actually came over. And I'll tell you that story, real fast here was, I got called in. So when I first started, my first year with, in education, my kids went to the provincial side, right? Because it was easy. For me, and my mindset was, okay, they won't bother me while I'm working in the school. Well, leadership felt that if you're leading the school and your kids are not in our system, what is that saying? What message are you giving that our school is not good enough for your kids? So what did I do? I moved all my kids over, including my grandkids. And then, but the change was my daughter, Sienna, was going into grade 10, and we talked to her because she had built some relationships in that school when we moved back. And she said, Mom, I want to be part of what you're doing. I like the change that's happening over there. So when we moved them over, we had about 40 other kids that came over because of that push that we're doing and the support. Because, when you're leading, we have to lead by example. If I'm leading a system and all of a sudden my kids are going to another school, what am I, and true, when it had to be told to me for me to understand that. So what we did was communication, filling in on what's happening and what we needed to do, and the research was the other part. The biggest indicator was research. Of course, they're not going to do something if we're just going into the unknown. They were scared of that. But when we have research that backs up some of the things that we're doing, there's more buy-in to what they're seeing. And with the change in the kids coming, the change in seeing all the land base and the language, hearing it, and all the things that we're doing in the school and the changes that we made, that's what the buy-in was they seen the change, and a lot of parents talking about the change. So, a lot of communication, I would say, and leading by example.
Tapue, good question. It's always good. Seems to be our own people. We kind of push back to one another. So that's a very good question to address. One more question. We've got time for one more question. Just one. I want to see maybe in the far corner or way over there. I know somebody is thinking, maybe Dennis over there is wondering what he can do to bring the Kennel Lake Cree Nation. Right there. Oh, thank you. The lady in the gray jacket.
I'm going to try verbalize this question here. We were just talking about how in our school there's such a high amount of trauma with our students that sometimes the curriculum isn't important, the Western curriculum, that the most important things are language and culture. And how we should work on that.
The first thing that we did was we made it a priority in our system. So what we're seeing a lot of was the kids that were struggling the most actually were probably the best kids outdoors. So we really pushed that land-based learning. I'll say Askip and Matsuan because we're told to start using our language. So using that Askip and Matsuan, that life learning on the land, is making sure that it was part of the process. So we have some kids that come from broken homes. There's a lot of trauma that inflicted on them. And so when they're out on the land, they flourish. So we're seeing those connections, also the learning of the language, building that identity within these kids. And so also bringing in, so I've worked a lot with Chris this past year, and we've had like almost monthly PDs for the teachers for them to recognize some of those things. And I know we're talking about that trauma liberation thing. I kind of mentioned that, but that's something we're going to be pushing in the next couple of years here, not just with our teachers, but with the kids themselves. So that we got to find those grounds and those different ways of reaching these children, because we see a lot of hurt. We see a lot of things that are coming, and the school is the safe space for them. And some of them are disclosing some information, and we're seeing some of these things happening, but a lot of it relates to the broken homes that are happening and the abuse and violence that happens in some of those homes. So when we're looking at them, we have to provide that safe space and use the things, the tools that we're given to be able to support those kids, and it's mainly through language and culture, because that's where they feel the most safe.
Okay. I just have one more question. When you're doing language and culture in the schools and it comes to ceremony, things like sweat lodges or feasts, because there's protocol to that and there's ceremonies, do you see a lot of pushback from the people in the community and the elders in the community in terms of trying to incorporate things like that in the school if you have tried? Or is it something that is accepted? Because in my experience, there's been a lot of pushback.
There is a lot
So
of...
we've just stayed away from it.
Yeah, there is pushback. However, when you look at the history and start using the history to say, yes, these practices did happen, and we're going to bring back that identity piece that we've been missing for a long time. And as long as we have something that shows, like I was talking about the teepees that we were seeing pictures from Cumberland House, we haven't seen stuff like that. And now we're seeing the ceremony that had happened there, and we're really doing the history pieces around that. I was actually just talked to the chief yesterday on my way here. I was having a meeting in my vehicle outside of a gas station, and he's walking by and he's like looking. So I had gone in, and he's like, do you ever not work? But anyway, we're just kind of laughing about that. But he talked about that very piece of, we're talking about that goose dance, and it was actually a ceremony that's about 6 days long, and it happens around this time. And he said, those are the things I want to see. So in a year, because it's going to take us a while to really rebuild some of those connections that were lost, but as long as we have backup to say, here, this is where it states that, because we know that there's always going to be pushback if they're not sure, right? And so communication to the parents, I know that drumming was a big thing. Some of them, I don't believe in this. And I'm going to go back. So when I first went back to Cumberland after I left MLTC, I was health director for a year. And while I was there, we held our first elders gathering on both sides, because there's a disconnect between the town and the reserve. And so we had that elders gathering, elders from both sides. We bought in dancers, and we did a pipe ceremony. That was the first time they've done that. And there was some pushback, but most of the elders sat and they watched and learned. And then, so it wasn't like foreign to them bringing it back again. Now, I know there was one, we had this, we had these gifts, these smudging kits that the chief had given to every teacher. 5 teachers didn't take them. We don't believe in that. So, but it was building that, and now there's like this understanding that, we're gonna start doing these practices, and we're slowly getting there. But what I would recommend, though, is the research from your community, the practices that happen that don't quite happen anymore, and then using the history pieces to build that foundation. I hope I answered your question.
Top way. Okay, I go say. Thank you. Let's give her a big round of applause here again, ladies and gentlemen. Celia, don't go anywhere.